This week, I'm turning my attention to the Nintendo Switch, and I'm going to tell you right now that the internet is not ready for what I found. The Switch has a really cool lineup of shooters, from new releases to old school ports, that has a lot of us excited, and has for some time, but I'm always hearing about how the experience is completely ruined by the excessive lag on the Switch itself, and if you're not playing in handheld mode and you play docked or wireless, that it ruins the experience. So this week, I put those claims to the test, not only by testing the Switch itself, but also by testing specific games against their older console counterparts. Few ever complained about those old console ports playing on their old CRT, but the Switch has taken quite a bit of heat. Is it accurate? Is it deserved? Or is it overblown? Let's find out. So first things first, does it matter how you play? Is handheld mode faster than wireless tabletop? Is tabletop faster than docked to your TV? Is wireless faster than wired? Let's see how the Switch holds up.
First, I compared the Switch in handheld mode, wireless Joycon, and using a third-party Pro controller, both wired and wireless. I tried this with a few games, and ultimately settled on using Gunbird 2 for testing, as its frame rate, regardless of overall delay, tested very consistent. Starting off, Gunbird 2 showed an average delay of 95 milliseconds in handheld mode, or almost 6 frames, which is consistent with what I've seen from other tests online. Common perception is that this is the best way to play for the least input lag versus wireless or docked to a TV. So my first order of business was to test that theory. I then followed this up using the Joycon wireless with the Switch still undocked in tabletop mode using its own LCD. And what I found goes against the common perception online. The results were literally identical down to a quarter of a frame. Every press was between 91 and 99 milliseconds, just like in handheld mode. How about docked? That's gotta be slower, right? And again, what I found goes against the common perception. It turns out that I got equivalent or even better performance using it docked into my display with the Joy-Cons wireless, an average of 91 milliseconds, a quarter to half a frame faster. This is without subtracting the 14 milliseconds of delay on my TV.
How is this possible?
Quite simple actually. The internal LCD of the Switch likely has a delay equal to or greater than my TV, which is less than a frame. And the wireless Bluetooth connection, if used correctly within a proper distance, doesn't add enough measurable delay to compensate for its internal LCD. Either that, or Nintendo purposefully added delay to handheld and tabletop mode to ensure the most consistent experience across all three methods.
I can already see the trolls coming out in force in the comments, ready with their but, no buts. You saw the numbers, down to a quarter of a frame. Don't like it? Tough titty, because this myth is busted. If you're a fan of shoot 'em ups, you should like my results, because I just showed you that aside from a really good or bad port, like the Psikyo collection that we'll talk about later, you can play wireless or docked without any hardware penalty to your performance. And the best part, big screen Tate, baby. Check this out. Boom! If you want to know where to get a cheap mount to do that yourself, check out the link in my description. But we're just getting started, because who wants to play shooters with a stock Joy-Con, right? Can't say I'm a fan, and this is where things get a bit interesting. Using a third-party Pro controller, I then wired USB directly into the dock and recorded a degraded performance of over a frame. I'd read that that was the case when wired direct, so I wanted to test it for myself. Theory proven right? Not so fast, my friend. Let me show you something.
I then used the same control wirelessly over Bluetooth to see if I saw an improvement, and the actual difference between hardwired and wireless was only half a frame, average. The biggest difference in performance was the controller itself, not the method of use, meaning the Bluetooth performance on the Pro third party, and likely many others, are inferior to the Joy-Con. But the point of this second test was to show that, contrary to popular opinion on the internet, wiring directly into the dock versus wireless does not add a full frame of delay, 8 milliseconds or less, from my results.
Ho ho Oh, you say? The Switch outputs at 60 frames, so any delay will only show up on the next frame. So who cares if it's 4 or 8 or 12 milliseconds? The reaction won't show up until the next frame. The internet is right. No, the internet is not. So I'll quickly explain.
Our goal in measuring is to record the output the very moment it happens, or as close as possible. What many forget is that while the console is in sync with the monitor, the recording device, meaning the camera recorder, is not in sync with the refresh rate of the monitor. What's also not in sync with the output are your button presses. So let's say you're only measuring in increments of 60 milliseconds, or 1 frame at 60 frames per second. That's what your video will show. The monitor could refresh 1 millisecond after your frame capture, but because you're only recording at 60 FPS, your video will show a full 60 milliseconds frame later. The second factor is your physical button press, which clearly is not in sync with the refresh rate. And when you press the button, plus the actual processing delay of the Switch, is what determines which frame the screen will draw your reaction. If you press a button just 6 milliseconds after a frame is drawn, and the Switch only takes, let's say, 8 milliseconds to process your press, it will display your action on the very next frame output. If you press a button 12 milliseconds after a frame is drawn, then you won't see that reaction until the following frame. And unless you're measuring into increments of a frame, you won't see this happen on a recording. It's the difference between saying a game has an average of 5 or 6 frames of lag. Yes, there's no such thing as 5.5 frames. You either see it on frame 5 or 6. But when the action happens on frame 5 half the time and frame 6 the other half, it's not accurate to just round up to 6 and call it a day.
So what are 3 things that we've learned so far? Well, 1, that handheld mode is not faster than wireless or docked to your TV, as long as you have a good monitor to play on. 2, that hardwired USB directly into the dock has half a frame, approximately 8 milliseconds of variance. And 3, that third-party non-Joycon controllers have additional latency, over a frame in fact, whether wired or wireless when used with the Switch. So using the Switch docked is not, I repeat, is not slower in performance than handheld mode or tabletop, as long as you have a good TV to play on. So if you want to play on your large TV in Tate mode, you're in business. Now, if your TV sucks and adds multiple frames of delay, well, you can check out my other video about that one. My biggest gripe with the Switch is a control issue, not a lag issue. I'd love to find something besides a Joy-Con with a great D-pad that performs just as well. And once I do, if I do, I may get an extra just to wire it up and test to see how it performs. If you have any recommendations, definitely leave them for me in the comments, as I'd love to know. And that brings me to part 2 of this test. How do the Switch games compare to some of their older console counterparts? Now, I'm working on modifying more controllers for the Mega Drive, for the Saturn, for the PlayStation 1, but for this test, I chose the Sega Dreamcast. Why? Because I wanted to compare a couple of specific games from the Psikyo collection that are also available on the Sega Dreamcast. And if you're not familiar, it's because the Psikyo collection on the Switch is much maligned online for its excessive lag and often called unplayable. I also wanted to compare a much better performing game, so I chose Ikaruga, also on the Dreamcast, and we're going to put them side by side along with the Psikyo games to see how they stack up. For the Dreamcast, I'm using an OSSC and going into the same TV that I'm using for the Switch. So it's one of our old school analog favorites gonna mop the floor with the Switch ports? Let's find out.
First, let's start off with Gunbird 2 again, and for this test, I'm using the directional pad for movement to measure the delay. To make things even more interesting, I'm using the third-party Pro controller on the Switch with the additional frame of delay versus the Joy-Cons. Using the directional pad, I'm measuring 6.5 frames of delay on Gunbird 2 on the Switch. Game-breaking, inexcusable, horrific! Just read the online forums, they'll tell you. Seriously though, I'm not here to make that judgment call. For competitive gaming, that amount of delay is certainly a problem, but we're here to compare, so let's continue. Now let's look at the Dreamcast. How does our analog friend fare? According to my results you see here, the Dreamcast version of Gunbird 2 also runs at a 6 frame delay. game-breaking, inexcusable, horrific. How did we ever play this game back then and enjoy it so much? I'm being sarcastic, of course. One thing to keep in mind is that at that time, we were playing on a CRT, so you'd be looking at around a frame or less of improvement versus this test, but that's about it. But if you're using the Joy-Cons, again, now you're a frame faster. Okay, let's try another game, Zero Gunner 2. Here they are side by side, the Dreamcast version running half a frame better than on the horrific Switch port. Is the DC port horrific too? Now let's try what's considered a good port, Ikaruga, also a well-regarded port on the Dreamcast. And what's this? The Switch port actually runs half a frame to a frame faster than on the Dreamcast? So you're getting about an identical experience to playing this on the Dreamcast using a CRT. Well, how about them apples?
So what do I think of these results? If you follow my channel, you probably already know. I'm always trying to get new blood hooked on the shooter crack pipe. Could the Psikyo ports have been done better on the Switch? You bet they could have. Without getting into the ports themselves, because this is not a review, you could play them emulated on a PC using arcade ROMs with far less delay. If you're one of the very few elite level players that can play something insane like the second loop of Gunbird 2, the Switch port is definitely not for you, but you probably already know that. For 99% of everybody else, the Switch port is near identical in performance to that on the Sega Dreamcast. And as far as I'm concerned, if the absolute laziest of ports, like the Psikyo collection for example, is still on par performance-wise than the port on the Sega Dreamcast, I'm still going to heartily recommend it to anyone but the most expert level of players. Now I realize that several frames of delay is not a trivial amount, so if it requires a bit more practice to get good, I've got plenty of jars of my butt paste laying around. Operators are standing by. What I am thankful for are the other good folks out there putting in the time and effort to test these things and providing us with valuable data. While I may not always agree with everyone's interpretation, I definitely value the time and effort that they put into it, and it should be applauded and appreciated.
On that note, I want to recommend a channel that I watch called Electric Underground. I added a link in my description as well as one to his site. If you're serious about your shooters, it's a great resource. He did a nice job measuring input delay across many platforms for various shooters. And again, while I may not always agree with the interpretation of all the results, as I don't see them through the eyes of a competitive player, like he is, the data is there for everyone to see. And while the data is only measured down to one frame, it gives you an idea of which ports and games perform better than others. He also did a video on modifying your Switch with Shmup to get some incredible performance when emulating many of these games. I do recommend checking it out, and something I want to try as well.
But in the meantime, know this. Is the Switch the lowest input lag current gen console? No. That honor goes to the PS4 Bluetooth. But does it have some kind of horrendous input lag, making it near unplayable unless you're playing in handheld mode? Not at all. You already saw here that playing wireless or docked will give you near identical results. I personally suck at playing on a small screen, so I play docked on my TV almost exclusively. So now you have a video to send all your Switch lag troll friends to. Send them here to take a look. But in the meantime, take a hit of that shooter crack pipe, however and whenever you can. The Switch has an awesome library of shooters, and don't ever take them for granted, because who knows how long before they go the way of the point and click, a relic of a bygone era. So until that happens, smoke them if you got them. If you enjoy these kinds of technical test videos and you haven't seen my other couple yet, I highly recommend checking them out. If you like this one, you'll probably like them too. One was on the PC Engine Mini and lag testing and debunking all those Lords of Thunder unplayable myths. The other one was debunking HDMI lag. So if you haven't seen them yet, definitely check them out right here.